So we're going to be styling up this application a little bit. And to do that, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to head to Google and go to Google Fonts, and I'm going to type in Source Sans Pro. And so Source Sans Pro is the font I'm going to use here. And so if you just type in Source Sans Pro, Google Fonts, it should be the first one that comes up. And then I'm going to click on this one here that says Regular 400. I'm going to select this style, and it's going to give me an import that I'm going to copy. So I'm going to take this right here. I'm going to copy it, and then I'm going to head back to my code, and I'm going to drop it right here. Simple enough, right? And then we're going to use this new font in our HTML and in our body. I'm actually just going to throw a bunch of styles in here, mainly because this isn't a course on styling, but if some of the styling is confusing, I may stop and kind of explain a little bit of it, but this is a course on React, so I'm going to rush through some of these styles, or at least just type them pretty quickly. So feel free to pause this, rewind, replay it, whatever you need to. I'm going to set a background color first, and we're going to make it a nice blue. Let's go something like, that's bluish, blue enough. And then we're going to make the color of all the font white, and let's make the font family, and we're going to set it to Source Sans Pro, just like we had here. And then for backup, we'll do Arial Sans Serif, in case that doesn't work. And then we'll set the line height to 1.62, and then add some padding. We'll give it 16 pixels of padding, and then 0 on the left and right. Oops, forgot a semicolon here. Okay, and then I'm going to make my app styles different. I'm going to say width 100%, max width 800 pixels, and that'll just make it go to 800 pixels if it can, otherwise it'll be smaller. And then the margin will be 10 pixels, and then auto, so it'll center itself. And then I'm going to, since we're rendering in our playlist, we have a div with a class name of playlist. Let's add a style for that one also. Let's say playlist, and I'm going to display it flex direction column. All Flex does, if you're not familiar with Flexbox, Flexbox is a way of styling and positioning elements in 2D. There's not really much else to that. If you're not familiar with Flexbox, this might be a little confusing, but at least seeing it in action, you'll understand what's happening here. So I'm going to save this, and then I'm going to head back to my application and see what it looks like. Okay, cool. It's all blue, and I have this playlist here. That's what I want. And then I'm going to head back to my playlist component. Or let's go to the playlist component. And in here, we're going to add some HTML. Let's do a few things. The first thing we're going to do is let's get rid of this, and let's create a div with a class name equals info. And this is where all the info about the playlist will live. We'll do a span with a class name equals status. And this will be the status of our playlist at the moment. And we're going to put paused, since no song is playing. And then we're going to put a paragraph tag with a class name equals title. And this is where the playlist title is going to go. I'm just going to put title in here for the time being. And then I'm going to make a div with a class name equals controls. And this is where all of our controls are going to go. And I'm going to use a cool little, I'm going to put another div in here first, an audio div. And I'm going to use the native HTML audio element. I'm going to say preload equals false, since we're not loading anything at the moment, but you can. If you want to read more about that, it's very cool. False, and then give it some controls, and it'll close itself. And then I'm going to add some buttons here, since we'll need some buttons to control our playlist. And I'm going to give it a div with a class name of buttons, and then a button with a class name equals btn, since it's a button. I'm going to do 2 of those, one with a left arrow, and I'm going to use the ampersand LARR semicolon, which is the entity code for a left arrow, and then do the same thing here with entity code for a right arrow. And so I've written a bunch of HTML like JSX here, and when I save this and I head back to my playlist, I should see the beginnings of a little playlist. It has the title, it has the controls, the audio controls, and 2 buttons that I can click on. Ooh, we're going to style these a little nicer in a second, but this is just writing some JSX in here. And so then let's go back into our app.css and let's add some styles to make those look nice. So below this, I'm going to say playlist.info. I'm going to display it flex, and I'm going to say flex direction row, so it's in a row instead of in a column. And I'm going to align items in the center, so they are vertically centered. And I'm going to justify content, space between, so they're as far apart from each other as possible. Then I'm going to say playlist.info.title. And by the way, when you put a space in between class names here, it's just saying look for the title, the HTML element with a class of title, inside the element with a class of info, inside the element with a class of playlist. Now we could totally just get rid of all that and just say .title, but the specificity makes us sure that we're only affecting that part of our application. So I'm going to give this a font size of 24 pixels. And then I'm going to, let's save this first. Let's see how it looks. Okay, it's now positioned these, because they're flex row and there's space between, it creates as much space between them as possible, which is what we want. And it's also bigger, 24 pixels. Let's also go ahead and style the controls. Let's make them display flex, flex direction row. Let's align the items in the center. Let's also make sure we've styled buttons a little bit, because we want our buttons to be styled, right? Let's actually style all buttons. Let's say, hey, every button on our page should have outline of none, border of none, background transparent. Just so that these look like actual arrows. Okay, there they are. And then let's style our BTNs here. Our button should, well, let's start our controls buttons first. And we'll display this flex. We'll justify the content, space between. We'll align items in the center. We'll make them really big, font size of 36 pixels. We'll give them a width of 100 pixels, and we'll give them a margin left of 50 pixels so that they space themselves out a little bit. Then let's make sure that they have a cursor that is a pointer. Let's also make them color white. And let's say whenever they're active, when someone is clicking on them, I want to transform them. I want to translate their Y position by 1 pixel. So it just moves down a tiny bit when you click on it. And what that'll do, okay, I don't know why the font size did not work. Yeah, whatever. You know what? I'll come in here. I'll just do this. Ah, there we go. And so then I click on them, and they move down a little bit, so it actually looks like a button. Very cool. Okay. Now this is getting a little bit closer to what we want. We're going to start adding tracks down here in a second, playlist tracks. But now we've seen how we can start writing components and styling them. And this is like the majority of the styling that we'll need to do. So at this point, we've covered a lot of ground. So don't worry if this was quick. You can watch the video as many times as you want to catch up and make sure you have what is displayed here. But in the next video, we're going to start going into props, which is the core data passing functionality in React.